Oh, hey, good.
Sure. Um, my name's Tom Davis. I'm chair of archaeology department at Lipscomb University. Uh, I worked 40 years in the field. I've excavated in Israel, or excuse me, I've excavated in Jordan, Cyprus, Egypt, Sudan, Kazakhstan, and I'm an expert on Roman Empire, time of Paul and Jesus. So I'm just happy to share with you.
Well, thank you so much. We are so excited to have you join us. And so, whenever you are ready, Dr. Davis, we are to learn.
Okay, I'll take over then and share the screen.
Yes.
Okay, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay. We're going to start with this guy, who actually, that's where the biblical account starts. In Matthew, where it says, in the days of Caesar Augustus. And for our purposes today, Augustus, of course, is a Roman, and he has taken full power of the Roman Empire. And that happened at the Battle of Actium in 31 BC. And this is why he is going to rule the entire space. And this is where Matthew will begin his account of Christmas. It's also important because he's the one for whom we are grateful that Herod the Great ended up in power. Herod, unfortunately for Herod, he had picked the wrong side. In typical Herod fashion, however, he dances his way out of it.
She was getting ready to be president.
Herod was a supporter of Mark Antony, but Antony loses the battle to Augustus. And of course, this is Antony and Cleopatra when they go down Egypt, and Cleo and he die. So after Actium, Herod's smart. He understands that he's got to get in the good side of the new guy. So he goes to Rhodes to meet Augustus. Now, he's already been made a king of Judea by the Senate in Rome. So he takes his crown off and he says to Augustus, look, I get it. I was loyal to Antony. But if I'm loyal to Antony, I'll be loyal to you. See, it matters to me. So you can trust me. Octavian, he's not named Augustus yet, accepts this because although he doesn't trust Herod, he knows that he can't really have an alternative. And Herod supports him with troops as he invades Egypt to take on Cleopatra. So Herod survives. And he becomes Augustus's choice. So Augustus steps back and says, no, Herod will keep his power. He'll stay in command in Judea. Because Herod plays both sides. He's a very powerful figure, but he also, by building the temple and engaging with the temples, he starts now, about 20 BC, this will become a way he can try and keep Jewish support. Herod's nobody's fool. He knows his power is very limited. He's called a client king for a good reason, because he's a client to Rome. So what's he do? He's a master builder. And that's why we call him Herod the Great, by the way. And what he does is he dedicates his many monuments to the leading Romans out there. So he calls the palace at Agrippaeum, named after Agrippa, who was Octavius's general who wanted Actium. Smart move. He names his palace in Jerusalem after Octavian. He names the city of Samaria, which he rebuilds as Sebaste, which is the Greek term for Augustus. And he builds a whole new port on the Mediterranean, which he names Caesarea, because Octavian calls himself Caesar as he was adopted by Julius Caesar. So he's trying to show, I'm a good guy. Now, Rome's main interest is military here. They just want to keep the peace. They have a great power rival in Parthia, who is to the east, modern Persia. And they know that they can't put colonies here because of the Jewish population. So their choice really is the best, that Herod will provide the cover for them. So this is the kingdom that Herod gets. As you can see, it's pretty substantive. He commands Galilee, Judea, Samaria, Perea. He controls basically all of ancient biblical Israel. And under Rome, but he has some independence still. He can maneuver. He has his own little army, and he has his own way of collecting taxes. Now, one thing Augustus does do to Herod is he takes away the Greeks. Any pagan-dominated cities where the Greeks are a higher population, but have been conquered by the Jewish kings before Herod, Augustus takes them away. He gives them back. And we can see this in archaeology and the coinage. So Herod's sort of constricted, but he's not removed. This lasts till a major visit Augustus makes in 20 BC. And the Gadarenes, that will ultimately be the city that Jesus will deal with the Gadarene swine story, complain about Herod. And they don't want to be under his rule. And Herod says, no. And Augustus says, no, you're going to stay there. He kind of likes Herod. He can trust him at least to keep the peace and to look out for his own interests, which happen to be Rome's as well. Now, one more thing we have to mention before we get deep into the Christmas story. There's a local power rival here. And if any of you have ever been to Jordan, you know this site. This is Petra. And Petra is the capital of a group called the Nabateans. Now, at one point, one of Herod's many wives had been Nabatean. So one of his in-laws, in a sense, is the king here. Like many in-laws, they don't really get along, okay? So Herod has to be careful about their power, and they interact with each other, and actually have a war in 9 BC. And Herod wins. So he's pretty happy about this. Augustus gets involved because, after all, these are two minor states here, once part of the empire. And he almost gives Herod the whole thing, Nabatea. But the king, because of Herod's cousin, by marriage, his in-law, bribes Augustus, and Nabatea continues. In fact, they'll outlive Herod. So that's Herod's sort of position at this point. He's under Roman control, but he has some freedom. And that's the world and the way he sees it when Christmas comes a knocking. The reason I talk about Herod so much is it is actually his death which helps us begin to date Christmas. We know from Josephus that Herod dies in the eclipse in March. And when we match up the astronomical records, it turns out to be 4 BC that Herod dies. Okay? So how do we end up? Does this match the biblical numbers? Actually, it does. Luke says that Jesus starts his ministry when he's, quote, about 30 years old, in the 15th year of Tiberius. Now, depending on how you start that can be either 27 or 29 AD. So how come we're off? I mean, so the age at Jesus' start of his ministry is either going to be 27 to 33. That's about 30, okay? Therefore, his birth sometime between 6 and 2 BC, somewhere in that window. So how come AD is 4 or 5 years off? Herod dies in 4 BC. Jesus has to be born before Herod dies. Well, you can thank this guy, Dennis the Short, or if you want to be Latin, Dionysius Exiguus. I prefer Dennis, but there we go. And he was a monk from 470 to 544, and he tried to figure out, he's the one who did the AD BC thing. But he used Olympic years to figure it out when Herod died. And Olympic years are 4-year cycles. And he misses one. So he's 4 years off. So 1 AD, it should have been 4 BC. But hey, who's perfect, right? Problem number 2 in the text, it reads that the census is done when Quirinius is, the Greek word is hegemon, translated in your Bibles usually as governor. But that's not quite accurate. The actual translation should be literally strong man or man in power, okay? Not necessarily the legal governor. Now, we happen to know that Quirinius was not governor between 6 and 4 BC. He's governor in 6 AD, but not 6 and 4 BC. But he was in a military command there. So it's possible that the gospel writer is telling us that, hey, I know Quirinius wasn't governor. It's not the census when Quirinius was governor. It's the census when he was the power guy. So that could be the reason why we don't have otherwise, the record of Quirinius being the governor here. It's a translation issue, not a historical issue. Now, we happen to know from later on in the Roman Empire, a census record from Egypt. And a lot of things come out of Egypt in records because that's where papyrus survives. It's so dry. We have ancient records surviving there that don't survive in Judea, don't survive in Jordan, don't survive in Palestine, okay? So we have a record that says this, quote, "It is necessary for all those residing for any cause away from their own districts to prepare to return at once to their own areas of administration in order that they may meet the family obligation of the enrollment." That's exactly what the New Testament tells us Joseph and Mary have to do. Joseph's not living where he's from, okay? His family's from Bethlehem. He's living up in Nazareth. He's in Galilee. What happens is about a century before Jesus' birth, there's a big migration of Jews from Judea up into Galilee because it becomes under Jewish control at that point. This is one reason, by the way, that Matthew gives you the genealogy of Jesus. He wants you to understand that he's a Jew from Judea. He's not some converted guy from Galilee. He's a Jew of ancient birth. All right? Because a lot of Galileans had converted. They weren't Jewish by tradition and ethnicity. Okay? He wants to tell you Jesus is. That's the reason why he tells you. So, interestingly, one of the Roman pagan secular historians, call them that technically, just says this is an obscure decade in Roman history. We don't understand or have much records from here. So there's an archaeological principle I'm going to be following here, which is that absence of evidence does not equal evidence of absence. It simply means it hasn't survived. Okay? We don't have evidence of Quirinius's role beyond being in the military. That doesn't mean he didn't have one. All right? We don't have a record of a census here in this time in the East. That doesn't mean there wasn't one locally in Herod's world. Now, I'm going to tell you it's worldwide. Its impact is worldwide, but the census itself was probably confined to that space. So when? I'm glad you asked that. We don't know. Because the only way we can really figure this out is based on John the Baptist's birth. His father is a Levite of a particular order in which he serves twice a year for 2 weeks in the temple. Unfortunately, that could be either spring or fall. We don't know which one it was. So the shepherds are out, which means it's not hard, cold, wet winter. Okay. But that could be spring, could be fall. Probably not hot summer either, because they'd be in different pastures. But we don't really know. So how do we end up with December 25th? You can blame this guy here. This is Constantine the Great, the first Christian emperor of the Roman Empire. And after he wants to go for power in 312 AD. And he takes on a challenger, and he has a vision the night before his battle that he hears a voice that says, "In this sign conquer." And the sign in the sky is the first 2 letters in Greek of Christ's name written together, a chi rho. for Christos. So, is a good Roman general who's very aware of the divine in his battles. He paints these on his shields, and he wins the next day. He doesn't expect to, but he does. Well, he says, okay, if this is the God who brought me victory, that's the God I want. So he becomes a worshiper of Christ. Now, he had been a worshiper of the sun, S-U-N, the unconquered sun. It's called Sol Invictus, before this. And guess whose day was December 25th? Yeah, the unconquered sun. That's the day they worship a deity called the unconquered sun. Solar worship. Well, he's got a good date. Why not? After all, this is the sun god, and that's how they're going to portray Jesus. You see the halo of the sun? That's where it comes from. Jesus is this new solar deity as well. He's God, the God of all, so therefore he's also the God. And Ambrose, who's an early Christian bishop, he writes in Greek, the unconquered sun, Helios, has become the unconquered sun, Huios. So it's a pun in Greek, and of course it's a pun in English as well. Makes it easy. So that's how they then said, well, if we're going to celebrate this deity Christ, this God, what day should we celebrate him on? The day of the sun. Same thing. So that's how we got December 25th. If you don't like that, you can celebrate Christmas whenever you want. And if you decide to do that, you can send me gifts as well. So anyway, there we go. Just in case you have these ideas. Right. Nazareth and Galilee. This is not where the elite meet. We have very small windows into Nazareth, okay, because it's been occupied for 2,000 years. So archaeologists just can't kick everybody out and dig there. The only way we get windows into it are underneath construction, like the Church of the Annunciation, a new construction the Catholic Church put up in the 60s. That gave us some windows. Also, recently, Ken Dark, a British archaeologist, has been able to excavate under the Sisters of Zion convent in Nazareth. And he has found a domestic structure, a courtyard house of the 1st century. Okay. Now, this gives us a little bit of real data that we can start talking about. So what's Nazareth look like? It's a small village. It's got houses, it has wells, it's dirt floors, there's sunken pits for storage. There's some substantive construction like the house under the convent. A lot of ground stone, olive oil, okay. In other words, the typical type of things you'd see in a small Jewish village of the 1st century. Well, don't let anybody tell you it's not there. It is there, archaeologically. It's absolutely there. But it's nothing great. And why should we expect it to be? Remember Philip's comment? Can anything good come out of Nazareth? Are you kidding me? Yeah, this is, the country cousins here, folks. And that's what the village looks like. Outside the town, there's a few Jewish tombs. So again, we know this was occupied by Jews in the 1st century. Survey data, archaeologically, has identified that this is a great place for agriculture. We have small little farm hamlets around the village, ideal for wine, for olive trees, grains, and a lot of sheep and goats. Exactly what Jesus talks about in his Galilee ministry, in his parables, and his things like that, okay? This is his world. Now, Joseph, he's a good man. He's going to be a great father. I mean, if Jesus uses the term Abba for God, which is Aramaic for father, that tells you Joseph must have been a pretty good guy. Okay. Now, I don't know much about him, but he's called a tekton in Greek, and that means more than a carpenter. It's not just a carpenter. It's more like a craftsman who's in the building trade. So he probably works with stone, with wood, he's like a general contractor for small jobs that will use stone and wood, things like that. He's a craftsman, in other words. Okay. So it wouldn't surprise us that, when Jesus talks about his parables, he talks about business, he talks about hiring people, he talks about being hired. As a small contractor, you'd probably be on both sides of that deal. I mean, I can see in the wintertime Joseph saying, hey, you got a leak in your corner of your room? I'll take care of the roof. I'll fix it. Oh, you need that table repaired? Bring it over. We'll deal with it. In fact, Jerome, who lives in 150 AD, but not Jerome, sorry, Justin Martyr, who lives in 150 AD, tells about seeing a table made by Jesus, which is really kind of cool. Would you love to have that, Okay. So he's more than a carpenter. Just, carpenter, that's a good image, but it's not all he is. Now, it's a long way to go from Nazareth to Bethlehem, at least 3 days. More if they go down the coast or down the Central Valley rather than through the Central Ridge. Quickest route takes them through Samaria, and they're probably not going to do that. But they go around through the Jordan Valley, it'll take them about 5 days. So here's your donkey. Hey, I can have a round of applause, please. It's hard to find a donkey in Jerusalem. That's from Jerusalem, by the way. I found him 30 years ago. So come on, give me a clap there. So he goes down to Bethlehem. There's a problem when they get there. Now, we've all had this problem at the holidays. There's too many relatives showed up. Okay? Now, they didn't have much choice because of the governors requiring them to do this, remember, the census. Herod's saying, you got to show up here. You got to register. But grandma and grandpa probably have the guest room, because that's what the text says. It's not an inn. It's not an inn. It's the guest quarters there's no room in the guest quarters. Okay? That's within the family. That means, sorry, where am I going to put them? Instead of a commercial inn, you really need to understand it as a family guest room. That's what the Greek really is telling us. So I know you love sermons about the innkeeper, but I'm sorry, you got to get rid of him. It's family. And it's a stable. Justin Martyr, our friend who's native of Palestine, records that it was a cave. Okay. Now that actually makes sense, because one of the things you do is if you dig a cave, if you have a cave under your house, that's where your animals are going to go, because they're going to be warm. They will bring warmth into the house by being in the cave underground, down at the basement. So what they do is they don't kick Mary and Joseph out. They put them in the basement where the animals are. Now, that means, I guarantee you, Joseph was not the only one there when Mary gave birth. In fact, Joseph probably wasn't there. The women probably kicked him out, okay? They wouldn't have wanted him anywhere around there. So he's all, stressing out with the family. And the women are down there taking care of Mary. Everything's going to be fine, Joe. Just chill out, okay? And the first one, you're going to take a while, And so, in other words, this is not something that's bad that he's in the stable. It's not something bad. Okay. It's normal for a working class family to do this, and when everybody's clogging up the household. So shepherds. Now this is the lowest of the low. You really want to get to the low, you're talking about the shepherds. Okay. This is not exactly a high-end occupation. But these guys are probably keeping the flocks for the temple. That's the ones who are primarily using the pasture around between Bethlehem and Jerusalem, would be the massive sheep flocks needed to produce the sacrificial lambs for the temple. Okay. Temple's a huge economic engine. And so this is probably what's happening. A little note. Luke is the only time we see these terms linked Savior, Christ, and Lord. Only time in the gospel accounts. Okay. Luke remembers a Greek. And so he is probably echoing back, interestingly, to this inscription from 9 BC, which tells us how the Greek world of the Eastern Mediterranean, i.e., the world of Jesus, saw these terms, how they hear these terms. So when the Greek people are reading the gospel, this is one of the things you're going to think about when you hear the term gospel. Good news. I won't read the whole thing, but just to say that it says, giving us Augustus, whom providence filled with virtue, he might benefit humankind, sending him as a savior. Okay. Then goes on later to say, these are the good tidings for the world. The word is evangelicon, gospel. In other words, what's saying, the gospel for the world is Augustus. So Luke's going to use these terms very specifically, and so are the writers of the Gospels very specifically to show you, no, Augustus is not the savior of the good news. Christ is. But that's what the hearers are going to jump to, okay? So that's one reason they're going to understand a little better than sometimes we even do. Oh, now our boy Herod. Herod's got a problem. And the problem is these three characters, or at least who they represent. We think of them as three: Balthazar, Melchior, and Gaspar. Here's a 6th century mosaic that names them. So names are very old, okay? But they also look like Persians. They're supposed to look like Parthians, the great power rival of Rome. Here's the problem. The Magi are part of the royal council of the kingdom of Parthia. These are not just scholars. These are like senators of the upper royal council. And one of the powers that they had was to confirm or select a new king for the Parthian Empire. Strabo tells us this. He says, quote, Posidonius affirms that the council of the Parthians is composed of 2 classes, one of relatives of the royal family and another of wise men and magi, by both of which kings are chosen. So they come to Herod. They ask the question, where is he that is born King of the Jews? There's a lot more behind it than just asking Herod, because these are the men who choose the king of the great power rival of Rome, and they're coming to Herod and asking that question. For we have seen his star in the east. Now, the Greek phrasing indicates a sight of the morning star, not a specific directional indication. We have seen his star in the east because in the east is when the morning rises. Okay? It's not that stars in the east all the time. It rises in the east. It's the morning star. The planet Jupiter, the king of the gods, the king star, rises as the morning star in 6 BC in the constellation of Aries. Wise men see to this. It's not a comet, it's not a supernova, it's not something like that. This is what they're keying to. Okay. For we have seen his morning star rising. That's the planet Jupiter. And that clues them in. There's a king coming. And they go west. This is probably how they go. They will come from the place near Babylon, near modern Baghdad, called Ctesiphon. It's the capital of the Parthian Empire. And they will travel up the river, up the Euphrates, and down through the cities to come in from the east, avoiding Roman control the entire way. That's a crucial thing for them. They avoid Roman power. They don't want to deal with Rome. This is directly to see what is this sign mean and who is this king. It's possible, just possible, speculation here, guys, that they are looking for a new king for Parthia as well. this king of the Jews. Maybe he'll be our king as well. Okay. 3 or 300. The Magi there's an inherently unstable government in Parthia, a lot of coups. Every aristocrat in the Parthian Empire is expected to have his own private army. So when these guys show up, they definitely brought armed guards for crossing the desert. You're not talking about 3 people. You may be talking about 300 people, okay, including the horse archers who are Rome's most feared enemy at this point. So, who defeated them dramatically in the desert, 53 BC, wiping out a Roman army of 3 legions. So that's the last time they fought. So they really don't want to get involved in another go-to with the Parthians, okay? So when they show up, this is a big entourage coming into Jerusalem. This is why when Herod says all of Jerusalem's troubled with him, you can't keep something like this quiet. You can't. Now, what he says to them, and their conversation will be private, but the fact they come is known by the whole city. Okay, that's what the text tells us. Makes perfect sense when you realize this is a major group, not just 2 guys, 3 guys on the count. So they show up. Herod says, okay, what do they need to know? To understand Herod's response, there's an interesting new idea out there that some scholars are tossing back and forth, and I kind of like it. The idea that Herod was beginning to think of himself as a Messiah himself. And it looks like we have some of those people mentioned in the New Testament. They're called Herodians. We don't know anything else about them, but it looks like they may be some of the people who accept that Herod's family should be the Messianic family, and that he's king of the Jews, and maybe that's the Messianic king. This plays well outside of Palestine in the diaspora among the Jewish who are not living in Judea, okay? So like he gives Olympic Games support. He supports the Jewish communities out there. He has a following out there. He rebuilds the temple. Think back to the Old Testament. Only a king can build the temple. The king who's Messiah, who's anointed, David's line. Now, Herod's not, but he's claiming that role, okay? It is certainly possible that the way, I'm not saying this is why I wrote it, but that the way Matthew tells their story is to combat people who believe that Herod was the Messiah, to show precisely why that's not true. Only, interestingly, the title King of the Jews, given to Jesus by the wise men, is only used twice in the New Testament frame. By the wise men and for Pilate. They call him King of the Jews. In fact, Herod's going to move his place of burial from Jerusalem, he's supposed to be buried, to the Herodium. This place he built for his own fortress, very close, just outside Bethlehem. His mother died here, and he's trying to link in some way himself to Bethlehem. Why would he want to do that? Possible. He's claiming he's a Messiah. So that's underlying this conversation you're going to have with the wise men. Okay. They examine scripture. They know from Micah he's supposed to be born in Bethlehem. So here you go. Here's a rainbow over Bethlehem. Hey, pretty good picture. And they're heading off to get there. Where do they come to? They don't come to the cave anymore. They come to a home. Okay. Probably a 2-story dwelling like this one. This is a typical Jewish, pretty well-off townhome of the 1st century. Now, we don't have any like this that we know of in Bethlehem. Okay. But again, we have very tiny windows. It's there, but again, it's just like Nazareth, hard to find. But this is the type of thing it would have been. Pretty extensive. There's space here. There's a private mikveh. This is a place where Joseph and Mary and the young child will be fine, growing in this space, okay, till he's well enough to travel, old enough to travel. This is what they give him. Now, everybody knows, gold for everybody knows 3 Kings of Orient are, right? The Christmas carol. Gold for a king, frankincense for the worship. That's the incense used in worship for the gods in the Near East, and myrrh, which is used in embalming. By the way, the Orthodox Church believes that the spices that the ladies take on Easter Sunday morning are the myrrh that was given to Mary by the wise men. But there's a lot more going on here. One of the nice things about this, and there is frankincense, gold, and myrrh, thanks to my brother-in-law who's based in Saudi Arabia for a while and got this from Suk. That's the real stuff, and that's where it comes from. It comes from Arabia. This is money. This is good money. This is very valuable stuff, and it's easy to carry. Okay. Here's a papyrus from Egypt. Tells us about myrrh, the value. Apollonius, to the Io state in the division of Palaemon and to other officials, greeting. Okay. For the myrrh distributed in the villages, no one shall exact more than 40 drachma of silver. That's 40 days' wages. For a mina weight, that's a small weight. Or in copper, 3 talents, 2,000 drachma, with a carrying charge of 200, 10%. Hey, carrying charge. We know this is business, right? The sum shall be paid not later than the third of the month to the collector. And by the way, you think you can get away with it? We therefore also sent the sword bearers. So pay up. Okay. But this is a very valuable item. So even if Joseph's given a small amount, a little casket of a small amount, that's a lot of money that he's going to be able to sell in the market in Alexandria in Egypt and live off of. Okay. He's going to have enough to support the family for a while from the gold, the frankincense, and the myrrh that the wise men give. The wise men are wise. I mean, they're magi. But, this is good, easily sellable, easily carryable, and things that won't cause a problem if they're discovered for taxation. So the angel tells Joseph, get out of here, go to Egypt. Why Egypt? Okay. Matthew will tell us it's to fulfill Hosea, right? And it does. But that's not the reason that Joseph hears. What Joseph knows is that Herod can't reach to Egypt, because Egypt's a province belonging solely to the Roman governor under Augustus's direct command. It used to be controlled by Cleo, who was Herod's enemy. So he is not allowed to send soldiers in there. He is not allowed to go in there after Jesus. No way does Augustus allow anybody like that in the door of Egypt. It's too important. It's too rich. It must be controlled directly on behalf of the emperor. So it's a very, very safe place for Mary and Joseph and the baby. Okay. Boy, a fun little fact when you stop and think about it. There's the painting with the pyramids in the background. We are closer to Jesus in age 2,000 years than he was to when the pyramids were built 2,500 years before his birth. I mean, that gives you some sense of the age of some of these cultures here. So Joseph and Mary have enough money. They're away from Herod's agents. They're in a safe place. But Herod is not in a safe place. Let me talk about why. His problem is this guy, the Emperor Augustus, who has brought eyeballs now onto Herod, because as I said, they would not have been able to keep this quiet in Jerusalem. That the Parthian rulers of the Parthian Senate who can pick the new king showed up and asked where the king was. Herod must act. So what's he do? He doesn't dare kill the wise men. He does that, he started a war. And Augustus will hang him up by his heels if he does that, because Augustus does not want a war with Parthia right now. And if Herod starts this, Augustus will wash his hands and say, give him to the Parthians and say, go ahead, take Herod. We don't care. Okay? 2, he has to kill Jesus. Why? Because here's the problem. In Augustus's mind, Here's the possible scenarios that have occurred. Herod's being played by the Parthians, who wish to set him up and replace him with a puppet, this new kid. And he'll answer to the Parthians instead of to Rome. Okay. Herod's an idiot. We can't, which means he's not smart enough to survive. We got to get rid of him. That's the least damaging on some levels. He might survive that, might. This is the worst. Herod tries to kill the Magi, forcing a war. Nope. Herod's selling out to the Parthians and will turn Judea over to them. This threatens Egypt. This is why Herod's going to support. Where can I go and worship the kid? No. He has to kill the child because all he'll be able to defend himself against these charges is this. They were going to try and replace me with this child. I killed the child so they couldn't do it because I am loyal to you, Augustus. He has no maneuvering room. He has no choice. The trouble is, if he killed Jesus and he says to Augustus, see, I killed the kid, Augustus is going to say, oh, really? Uh-huh. You did this without talking to me? You might have caused a war with Parthia without talking to me? You wanted to kill the guys from their royal house of rule? You didn't talk to me? Herod's, I think his survivability is very limited in this scenario. And he dies anyway. Okay. He's going to die of natural causes. Pretty horrible death. You read about it in Josephus. But it's probably good for him, okay? Even though it was bad, because it could have been a lot worse. So Herod's dead. Now what? Augustus has a problem. He famously says, I'd rather be Herod's pig than Herod's son because they survive better. Because Herod really is not a good daddy. But that means when he dies, there's not much left. Papa, brother, one of his wives, two of his sons, third of his sons. Oh, yeah. Here's what he's stuck with. This is how they're going to split it up. Three of the grandsons, or the sons, excuse me, three of them are going to become rulers of various types, but they're not going to have power, really major power. They're going to have regional power. Herod Antipas, the Tetrarch of Galilee. Archelaus, Ethnarch of Judea, not king. Philip, Tetrarch of Iturea. And Salome, Herod's sister, shown Herod a few cities on the coast. And if she dies in 10 AD, they'll go to the emperor. Okay. I think Herod's playing with the wise men. Again, he had no choice, Herod didn't, but his dalliance with them in Augustus's eyes means he cannot trust and never will trust again a single ruler of Judea. It was too risky because Herod could have sold out to Parthia, opened the border to Egypt. Augustus is not going to risk that again. So he's going to split up the power. And Archelaus, who inherits Judea, is not by any stretch of the imagination anything like his father, except in his cruelty, but he doesn't have the governance, he doesn't have the political skill, he doesn't have the social skills of his father, and he's failure. His succession is challenged. He sends troops into Jerusalem to secure the temple. I mean, come on. That's the way to start. He goes to Rome and gains support from Augustus, but it's much smaller because Augustus does not trust him and does not trust the Herods now, I think because of the wise men incident. Why do we say we don't know about this from Roman history? You think they're going to talk about this? I mean, really? He fails to keep the peace. That's one of the complaints. Eventually, Augustus deposes him for his cruelty in 6 AD, ships him to southern Gaul, it's a tough life. I know you get exiled to southern France, okay, but he does lose his power after all. He dies there in 18 AD. He actually gets mentioned, I think, obliquely in one of the parables of Jesus. In Luke 19, Jesus tells a story. A nobleman went into a far country to receive for himself a kingdom and then return. But his citizens hated him and sent a delegation after him, saying, "We do not want this man to reign over us." "But as for these enemies of mine," said the nobleman, "who did not want me to reign over them, bring them here and slaughter them before me." That's Archelaus. Every Galilean who heard Jesus tell this parable will know precisely who he's talking about. And they go, "Oh, yeah. They would know it. We don't know it, but they would know it immediately. He's talking about Archelaus. So Rome's final solution for Judea: can't trust Archelaus, can't trust any of the other guys, don't want to give him more power. There's nobody else left in the family. All right, put a Roman governor in. That way we at least control the border to Egypt. But I think it's the wise men, it's the Christmas account, the Christmas coming, that causes Augustus to no longer trust the Herods. And Herod had no choice. He was stuck. It really hung in the trap of his own making. Archelaus' death allows Jesus to return in safety and in obscurity. He avoids Judea, too much unrest, Roman rule. Let's not have that. Let's go up to Galilee again. Go back to Nazareth. And ultimately, Jesus will build connections up there, and for 3 years in his ministry, he'll be safe in Capernaum, because he'll be protected by both the centurion, by a Jewish ruler, an archon, probably of the power of Herod Antipas, and the synagogue rule. And you put together the stories of the Gospels, and basically Capernaum becomes a safe place for Jesus. And the fact he's obscurity in a little tiny place nobody's going to go to, Nazareth, keeps him safe. In a way, we got the same question ourselves. What are we going to do? Just like Herod with the Christ child. Thank you. Any questions for me?
I have a question. Did Mary have to go with Joseph for the census?
Yep.
It was required of her too.
Oh, yeah. Frankly, she doesn't count, because Joseph's family is the one that does. So she's got to go with him. That's where the family is. Yep. Tough ride when you're 9 months pregnant.
Yeah.
And
Thank you
that's
so
why I
much for
say,
that.
no, Joseph is trying this alone. You better believe that the family women are gathered around, taking care of her and saying, "Get out of here, buddy. Get out of here."
Yes, sir.
It was a pleasure. So go ahead.
Yes, sir. Thank you for this evening. Was it Alexandria where Mary and Joseph traveled to with the baby Jesus to flee to? Or is that?
It makes sense. It's a very large Jewish community there. And, they may even have had relatives. We don't know this, but there was enough people there that there were probably enough connections that they could find a place to stay. And as I say, they had the money, that they had the material they could sell in the market and gain enough money to survive without a problem. And you're going to be hidden in a crowd. There's a huge community, so it's in thousands, 40, 50,000.
Hiding in a big city.
Yeah, exactly. Hiding in a big city. That's right. And of course, that could provide a good place for Joseph to work as well.
Excellent.
So with all of the distrust going on, especially of the Herods, would that play through later on? I mean, does that kind of linger? And that's sort of why Herod wanted to see Jesus and leans into John as well.
Yeah, in fact, it's not going to be until Claudius decides that a guy who grew up with him as a hostage, Agrippa I, he will give power back to Agrippa for 3 years to control all of the kingdom of Herod, essentially. Yeah, but that's not going to happen until 40 AD, 39 AD. So it's for 40 years it'll be ruled directly by Rome. And that's why it's always an issue when you go down into Judea, you're entering a different kind of governmental space and things like this. Taxation's different. The Chaldeans aren't paying taxes directly to Rome, paying them to Herod Antipas. Okay, but in Judea now they are. So Zacchaeus is collecting tithe for Rome, but Matthew is probably not. He's not collecting for Rome. He's probably collecting for Herod Antipas or for the temple. So it's different. They're crossing lines. There's safety. You know, both initially in Capernaum for Jesus, and then it's ultimately they're going to challenge the Roman government to get him killed.
Dr. Davis, we have a question from the chat, and
Yeah.
Steve asks, could you comment on the lineages that Herod the Great fabricated for his messiahship?
Comment on the what? I'm sorry.
On the lineages that Herod the Great fabricated.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What he's trying to do, in a way, is by building the temple, claiming the mantle of a descendant of David, although he is not by any means one. He doesn't claim to be one. He does, however, marry the heiress to the Hashmonean kings, the independent Maccabean kings, okay, who ruled till Rome got rid of them. So he has that aura of, hey, I'm in the family sort of thing. I can inherit this. But this is why he has such opposition from the Pharisees, who are totally opposed to a non-Davidic king. And he's trying to spin this a little bit. That's why most of his support seems to come from outside of Judea rather than inside Judea. But that's a good question. Hey, Emily. Emily was one of my students, so that's,
I have a question. It doesn't have to do with the lecture, but how was your last dig season? How did it go?
Well, since I spoke with you last, I went to Jordan, and we had a great season at a site called Avila. It is a 7th century AD. It's one of the cities of the Decapolis, and it's a lot of church. We're excavating a church, trying to figure out how old it was, what it was based on, and the previous excavators had not done a good job at all. I hate to blame my brothers in archaeology, but that's reality. And we were able to figure out the probably resting initially built on top of a temple platform.
Oh, okay. Very cool.
Yeah, which is not common. And so it's interesting that they did that. So we're going to explore more of that in 2 years. We'll go back again. So, yeah,
Oh, cool.
Good season.
Nice. Yeah, that sounds like a very good season. We used to say when I used to go on digs, a juicy dig.
And we'll be back in Cyprus again in the summer of 2024, digging at my site Corian, which is a 4th century AD site destroyed by an earthquake, just as it's Christianizing. So we're looking at that window. So yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, very cool.
In regards to the Avila site, I'm sorry, I'm curious. In regards to the Avila site, the church, any theories as to what the temple foundation could be, or anything that possibly was found before Lipscomb came onto the scene to dig at the church?
They didn't know it was there. They looked in the wrong place to try and check the foundations. Okay, they were thinking not the platform that was built for the temple. The church was placed on a small portion of that platform. As you know, Emily, those are very major platforms for those temples. And so the previous excavators tested right inside the church, chancel, right at the front, and they couldn't find anything. So, okay, nothing's under here. So, you got to think a little differently sometimes. It's not straightforward archaeology.
Great.
Are
Okay,
there any other questions for Dr. Davis?
Yep. Now's your time to ask the archaeologist, you know. Don't have to be Christmas questions either. Anything you want.
You
Unmute
will have to
yourself.
unmute yourself if you have a question.
Janice, if you want to ask something, unmute. There we go.
No, can't hear you.
You're still muted, Miss Janice.
In answer to Steve's question, is there an update on Bethsaida? I'll be seeing Notley in January, and probably at the ASOR meetings in a couple of weeks, so I'll find out then.
Okay.
And he's not. Okay. Again, I don't like my brother. I mean, he's not an archaeologist. He's a New Testament. Okay, but yeah, I'll find out what's going on.
All right, Miss Janice, do you have questions for Dr. Davis?
The archaeologists
No.
are archaeologists, not Bible guys, so it's kind of different.
Will you be doing another lecture soon?
Not up to me.
Okay.
I'm happy to.
Okay. Thank you.
Dr. Davis actually did a lecture for us in the spring on the archaeology of Easter. So this is the archaeology that we've already started our season. So if you want, actually that lecture was recorded as well. So you find the archaeology of Easter lecture that he gave in the spring. And who knows, we might have him, maybe after his next season or something, talk about where he's activated and everything.
Always happy to talk archaeology with people who love it. I'm going to have to beg out. Been a great pleasure.
Thank
Now,
you.
Remember, if you feel the urge to celebrate Christmas at another time, just remember me, drop a few gifts there. That's okay.
Okay. All right.
And don't get mad at your pastor when he preaches about the innkeeper. He can't help it. He doesn't know it. Okay.
Thank you.
That's
All right.
good.
Goodbye.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you everybody for joining us today. And we hope you'll join us for our next virtual lecture, which will be on February 16th. And we are going to have a Holocaust survivor speaking about her experience and her post-Holocaust experience as well. So we would
When
love
will
to have
that
you
be?
guys.
When is that
It'll
one?
be February 16th.
February. Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Will this
Yes,
be
and we will. Go
will
ahead.
this be available to watch in more entirety to watch again? Because he just said so much interesting stuff. I'm still processing it. Will it
Yes.
be viewed again?
So, yes, so this has been recorded for that purpose specifically.
Okay.
So this will be uploaded to our YouTube page probably sometime within the next week. And you'll be able to rewatch it and, send the link to your friends, and we'll post it to our Facebook page as well for everyone to enjoy. But yeah, you'll watch this again, and hopefully join us for our next lecture as well. Something that we are going to be doing moving forward is we're going to make all of our virtual lectures free
Nice.
for everyone to enjoy. So we hope that you'll join us for the next one in February.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you all for support.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.